Is your life secretly crushing you? Are you sick of pretending? If you're waking up and realizing this isn't it, you need to hear what Shi Heng Yi discovered. Because what I'm about to reveal could totally transform everything, especially the final point. Don't miss this. Imagine a moment when you just can't pretend anymore. Those masks you've worn for years, maybe even decades, suddenly feel incredibly suffocating, making it hard to breathe. The endless games everyone else seems to be playing in their lives, they suddenly become crystal clear and almost laughable to you. That seemingly perfect life you've painstakingly built, the one designed by other people's expectations, now feels less like a dream and more like a carefully constructed prison. The truth is, you're not depressed. You're simply waking up to a deeper reality. And with this profound awakening comes a slow, quiet, yet absolutely necessary shedding of everything that isn't genuinely, authentically you. Shi Heng Yi, that brilliant mind, dedicated his entire life to meticulously documenting this very process. He observed thousands of people as they underwent spiritual transformations and noticed something truly profound. Genuine spiritual growth rarely happens through sudden, dramatic declarations or instantaneous radical changes. Instead, it unfolds as a gradual release, a slow letting go of old patterns and behaviors that once felt essential for survival, but now just feel like a heavy weight, suffocating your true self. Today, we're going to dive deep into the 7 crucial things Shi Heng Yi observed that highly spiritual people slowly, almost instinctively, begin to quit as they awaken. These aren't conscious, planned decisions at first. They're more like deeply felt allergic reactions to inauthenticity, reactions that only grow stronger and clearer as your spirit expands and purifies. You don't just wake up one day and decide to quit these things. Instead, you wake up one day to the startling realization that you've already quit them, perhaps without even trying. If you've been feeling like you can no longer engage with life in the same old ways, if you sense you're becoming increasingly incompatible with what's considered normal existence, then this is precisely why. Your spirit is slowly but surely rejecting everything that isn't deeply aligned with your fundamental truth. And according to Shi Heng Yi, this profound rejection isn't just inevitable, it's absolutely essential for your complete transformation. The very first thing highly spiritual people slowly, almost imperceptibly quit is that desperate, gnawing hunger for external approval. It's not because they consciously decide one day to stop caring what others think. Rather, something profound shifts within their psychological makeup that makes seeking approval feel physically uncomfortable, almost sickening. Think of it like this. Imagine you've spent your entire life enjoying sugar, and then, without warning, your body develops a sudden, debilitating intolerance to it. That's precisely what happens spiritually. The very approval you once craved, the validation you tirelessly chased, suddenly starts to make you feel unwell, causing a deep unease within your soul. Shi Heng Yi meticulously watched this phenomenon unfold in patient after patient. As they progressed spiritually, they consistently reported strange, inexplicable discomfort in situations where they used to instinctively seek validation. He recounted the story of a woman who had lived solely for her mother's approval, only to suddenly feel nauseous every time she tried to please her. Then there was the man who had craved constant professional recognition, only to find himself losing all interest in promotions or accolades. This wasn't a rebellion or a conscious act of defiance. It was a profound evolution. What's truly happening here is that as you develop spiritually, you begin to access what Shi Heng Yi called the self, your true authentic core that exists far beyond the confines of the ego. This deeper self doesn't need external approval because it is already inherently complete, whole and perfect within itself. It's much like a mighty tree that has finally found its own deep groundwater. It no longer depends on fleeting rain for sustenance. However, this quitting process is painstakingly slow and often fraught with emotional pain. You'll likely find yourself in a meeting just about to utter exactly what everyone wants to hear, and then suddenly you can't. The words catch in your throat, your body inexplicably rebels, and you might even break into a sweat. This isn't mere anxiety, it's your authentic self resolutely refusing to participate in the charade, the performance. One of Shi Heng Yi's patients articulated this perfectly, saying, "I used to effortlessly rearrange my entire personality depending on who I was with. Now, when I even attempt it, it feels like my soul slams on an emergency brake. I physically cannot contort myself for approval anymore." This inevitably creates a peculiar in-between period where you've stopped seeking approval internally, but you haven't yet fully adjusted to this new reality externally. You might stop posting for likes but still instinctively check your phone. You cease fishing for compliments but still keenly notice their absence. You're living between two worlds, no longer addicted to approval, but not yet entirely comfortable existing without it. Shi Heng Yi observed that this profound transition typically unfolds over several years. Initially, you quit seeking approval from strangers, then from acquaintances, then from friends, and finally, and most challenging of all, from your own family. Each layer of release brings with it both immense freedom and a strange sense of grief. You're not just quitting a superficial behavior, you're letting go of an entire identity you once held dear. The woman who lived for her mother's approval, for example, endured months of what felt like withdrawal. She would automatically reach for her phone to call her mother for validation, only to suddenly remember that she simply couldn't do that anymore. Not because her mother wasn't available, but because her own soul wouldn't permit her to make the call. Her hands would literally tremble when she tried. But here's the truly beautiful part that Shi Heng Yi documented. As the desperate hunger for external approval slowly dies, something else is wonderfully born within you. An unshakable, profound sense of inner worth emerges. This isn't mere confidence, which often still references the opinions of others. This is true worth, which references only itself from within. You stop needing others to validate your very existence because you finally deeply feel your existence resonating from within your own being. This is precisely why highly spiritual people often possess such a mysteriously calm and effortless confidence. They're not actively trying to be confident, they've simply quit the utterly exhausting game of trying to earn their right to exist through others' approval. They found what Shi Heng Yi termed inner authority, an unwavering compass that points true regardless of any external opinions or judgments. The second thing truly spiritual people slowly quit often surprises many: the pervasive need to feel special. This might seem counterintuitive at first glance, because aren't spiritual people supposed to inherently know they're unique? Yes, absolutely. But there's a profound difference between deeply knowing your own inherent uniqueness and constantly needing to be perceived as special. Shi Heng Yi discovered that as individuals genuinely develop spiritually, they experience what appears to be a paradox. They become more authentically unique while simultaneously caring far less about being recognized as special. They become more truly themselves while needing less and less external recognition for it. In essence, they become extraordinary precisely by quitting the ingrained need to be seen as extraordinary. Here's how this typically unfolds. Early in spiritual development, people often experience what Shi Heng Yi aptly called spiritual inflation. They undergo a genuine awakening experience, a powerful insight, and suddenly they feel chosen, special, and even subtly superior. They believe they've seen truths that others haven't, touched dimensions inaccessible to others, and now possess knowledge that eludes the masses. For a while, this potent feeling of specialness genuinely feels like a great spiritual achievement. You might find yourself subtly, or sometimes not so subtly, letting others know about your dedicated meditation practice, the incredible synchronicities you experience, or your profound spiritual insights. You're not exactly bragging, but you're definitely, perhaps unconsciously, differentiating yourself from what you perceive as the unconscious masses. But then something pivotal shifts. Shi Heng Yi observed this exact shift in every genuinely spiritual person he studied. The inherent need to be special slowly begins to feel incredibly heavy, utterly exhausting, and ultimately false. It feels like wearing a magnificent costume that once gave you the sensation of having wings, but now feels like an oppressive set of chains. Shi Heng Yi once treated a man who had built his entire identity around being spiritually advanced. He was the wise friend everyone turned to for counsel, the one who always had the deepest insight, the one who meditated longer, fasted harder, and claimed to know more about consciousness than anyone else. Then one day, right in the middle of explaining some intricate spiritual concept, he just stopped mid-sentence. He later told Shi Heng Yi, "I suddenly saw myself from outside, and I looked ridiculous. I was using spirituality purely to be special, which is the exact opposite of being truly spiritual." This powerful recognition marks the beginning of the slow quit. You start catching yourself just before you're about to share your spiritual experiences for that fleeting hit of specialness. You halt before dropping hints about your elevated consciousness level or positioning yourself as more awakened than others. And each time you catch yourself, it becomes increasingly difficult to continue the performance. This quit manifests in surprisingly subtle ways. You stop mentioning your spiritual practices unless someone directly asks. You lose all interest in comparing consciousness levels or spiritual progress. You simply quit needing others to know about your unique insights. You become profoundly comfortable being seen as ordinary, even mundane. You stop using spiritual language as a tool to elevate yourself above others. One woman beautifully described her own transition. "I used to need everyone to know I was different, deeper, more conscious. Now I'm perfectly happy being invisible. Being special was a prison. Being nobody is true freedom." Yet, here's what Shi Heng Yi found most fascinating. As people truly quit needing to be special, they simultaneously become genuinely unique. This isn't a performative uniqueness, but an authentically intrinsic one. When you stop striving to stand out, your genuine nature naturally and effortlessly distinguishes itself. When you quit performing your specialness, your actual innate special qualities emerge without effort. Shi Heng Yi called this process individuation without inflation. You become completely, utterly yourself without any external need for anyone to notice. You are like a beautiful flower that blooms exquisitely whether anyone is watching or not. The blooming itself is the purpose, not the observation. This profound shift often terrifies the ego, which has typically built its entire intricate structure upon the foundation of being special. The ego urgently asks, "If I'm not special, then what am I?" The liberating answer, which often takes years to fully and completely accept, is simple. You're just you, and that in itself is enough. That is absolutely everything. The third thing highly spiritual people quit is perhaps the most surprising of all, the performance of happiness. Let me be clear, this isn't about quitting happiness itself, but rather the constant, exhausting performance of it, the ingrained need to always appear positive, perpetually enlightened, and seemingly beyond suffering. Shi Heng Yi observed that genuine spiritual development doesn't magically make people perpetually joyful. Instead, it makes them perpetually real. And reality, by its very nature, encompasses the entire vast spectrum of human experience. Deep joy alongside profound sorrow, moments of peace punctuated by periods of turmoil, and the interplay of both light and shadow. In our modern culture, there's an immense, unspoken pressure to constantly be happy, especially if you identify as spiritual. You're somehow supposed to be immune to negative emotions, above petty concerns, and constantly radiating unconditional love and light at all times. But Shi Heng Yi discovered that this continuous performance of happiness is actually deeply anti-spiritual. It's just another mask, albeit one with a spiritual veneer. As people develop true spiritual depth, they slowly, almost involuntarily, abandon this utterly exhausting performance. They stop pretending everything is fine when it clearly isn't. They stop forcing smiles when they are genuinely grieving. They cease spouting positive affirmations when they are truly struggling at a deep level. They quit what's known as spiritual bypassing and instead embrace what Shi Heng Yi called spiritual embodiment. A therapist whom Shi Heng Yi supervised underwent this dramatic transition firsthand. She had meticulously built her entire practice around being the enlightened healer, always perfectly centered, unfailingly peaceful, and always radiating profound wisdom. Then, tragically, her son died, and she simply could no longer maintain the performance. She bravely tried to return to work, attempting to keep her spiritual persona fully intact, but her body flat out wouldn't let her. She would sit with clients, desperately trying to be the wise, serene healer, and suddenly tears would just start falling uncontrollably. She told Shi Heng Yi, "I thought being spiritual meant transcending human pain. Now I realize it means fully embracing it. I can't be the enlightened one anymore. I can only be the real one." If you're recognizing yourself in these unfolding patterns, if you're truly feeling that slow, gentle release of things you once clung to so tightly, I want you to know deeply that you are absolutely not alone in this. This profound journey of slowly quitting what no longer serves us is happening to millions of awakening souls across the globe right now. Before we delve into the remaining 4 incredible things spiritual people quit, take a moment right now to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Join our rapidly growing community of souls who are courageously shedding the false to embrace the true. And please, I encourage you, share in the comment section below what you found yourself slowly quitting. Your story, your unique journey might be precisely what someone else desperately needs to hear today. Let's continue this journey together, because the next patterns we explore might be the very ones you're experiencing in your life at this exact moment. The 4th thing, highly spiritual people slowly, gradually quit, might just be the most profoundly destabilizing of all. The ingrained need for certainty. It's that desperate, clinging grip on knowing, on fully understanding, on having all the definitive answers. Shi Heng Yi discovered that genuine spiritual growth doesn't lead to accumulating more answers. Instead, it leads to a deep, serene comfort with open-ended questions. It doesn't lead to more certainty, but to a profound peace with mystery. It doesn't lead to knowing everything, but to an ever-expanding sense of wonder. This naturally terrifies the mind, which has spent a lifetime diligently collecting certainties as if they were protective armor. Statements like, "I know who I am, I know what's true, I know how life works, I know what happens after death, or I know my true purpose," feel incredibly safe and secure. But Shi Heng Yi observed that these very certainties, ironically, are often nothing more than meticulously crafted prisons. As spiritual depth truly develops, these rigid certainties begin to crack, not necessarily because they are proven empirically wrong, but because you come to the profound realization that the very need for certainty itself was inadvertently keeping you from accessing a deeper truth. Truth, in its essence, isn't something you can firmly grasp and hold on to. It's something dynamic that flows and shifts. The moment you try to grip it tightly, it instantly solidifies into dogma, losing its aliveness. One of Shi Heng Yi's most brilliant patients was a physicist who sought his help in the midst of a profound personal crisis. His spiritual awakening had completely shattered his scientific certainties. He confessed, "I used to believe I knew exactly how the universe worked. Now I realize I don't even truly know how my own coffee cup works. The more conscious I become, the less certain I am about absolutely anything." This wasn't confusion or intellectual regression. It was, in fact, an incredible form of clarity. He was beginning to see past the illusion of knowing into the breathtaking reality of mystery. However, this transition was agonizing. His mind desperately yearned to rebuild certainty, to find new spiritual facts, to replace his old scientific ones. But every single time he attempted to crystallize a spiritual truth, it would simply dissolve before him. Shi Heng Yi watched him slowly, patiently quit the need for any solid ground beneath his feet. First, he quit needing to know how things worked. Then, he quit needing to know why things happened. Finally, he quit needing to know who he even truly was. He entered what Shi Heng Yi recognized as the cloud of unknowing, a profound state where not knowing becomes more truthful, more real than any knowing could ever possibly be. This gradual quitting of certainty happens in distinct stages. First, you release certainty about the external world. Then you release certainty about others' motivations. Next, you release certainty about your own past. And finally, and most deeply, you release certainty about your own identity. Each stage of this profound release brings with it both intense terror and incredible liberation. The ego experiences it as a kind of death, which in many ways it is. the death of the know-it-all mind that kept you safe but confined you to a very small existence. A woman eloquently described her own process. I used to have extremely strong opinions about absolutely everything: politics, spirituality, relationships, my life's purpose. Now, when someone asks what I believe, I honestly don't know. And it's not from confusion, but from a profound openness. Every certainty I release creates this beautiful space for something far more exquisite than mere answers, presence with what simply is. Shi Heng Yi found that people who successfully quit the need for certainty develop something truly remarkable: the innate ability to hold paradox. They can deeply believe contradictory things simultaneously without needing any artificial resolution. They can act decisively in their lives without being completely certain. They can commit fully to a path while remaining gracefully open to the possibility of being entirely wrong. This isn't a wishy-washy relativism. It's what Shi Heng Yi observed as true spiritual maturity. The deep recognition that reality is far vaster and more complex than any single mental model can ever possibly contain. You quit certainty not because nothing is true, but because truth itself is far too alive, too dynamic, to be ever caged within rigid concepts. The fifth thing highly spiritual people slowly quit is undeniably one of the hardest: blame. And I don't just mean blaming other people, I mean the entire intricate victim-perpetrator narrative that the ego so often uses to make sense of suffering. Shi Heng Yi observed that as individuals genuinely develop spiritually, they undergo a radical and profound shift in how they relate to their own wounds and past hurts. They stop seeing themselves primarily as helpless victims of others' actions and instead begin to see themselves as active participants in a much larger, unfolding pattern. This isn't about excusing harm or bypassing legitimate trauma. It's deeply about reclaiming one's innate power. The act of quitting blame is slow and frequently very painful because blame serves so many crucial psychological functions. It neatly explains our pain, preserves our sense of innocence, gives us a compelling identity, and even bonds us with others who have been similarly wronged. Therefore, letting go of blame can often feel like letting go of our entire life story, our very narrative. Shi Heng Yi recounted the story of a woman who came to him absolutely brimming with legitimate grievances: an abusive childhood, a betraying ex-husband, discriminating employers. Her anger was absolutely justified, and her blame in many ways was accurate. But this unwavering focus on blame was also, slowly but surely, destroying her. She was so completely identified with being wronged that she simply couldn't move forward in her life. Through years of diligent work, Shi Heng Yi watched her slowly, painstakingly quit blame, not by denying what had happened, nor by prematurely forgiving, but by truly recognizing her own unconscious participation in certain repeating patterns. She began to see how she had unconsciously chosen partners who would betray her, jobs that would discriminate, and situations that would invariably confirm her victim identity. She told Shi Heng Yi, "The day I finally stopped blaming was the day I truly became free. Not because others weren't wrong, they absolutely were, but because I finally saw that holding on to blame was my own choice. I was using their wrongness as a way to avoid my own responsibility for my life." This profound shift is excruciating for the ego. It means taking responsibility for things that genuinely, objectively weren't your fault in the conventional sense. It means bravely seeing how you unconsciously participated in your own wounding. It means admitting that on some deeper level, you needed the very experiences you've spent years blaming others for. Shi Heng Yi documented the stages of quitting blame. 1. Intense rage at the unfairness. This shouldn't have happened. 2. The recognition of repeating patterns. This keeps happening to me. 3. Seeing unconscious participation. I somehow contribute to this. 4. Taking radical responsibility. I am ultimately the author of my own experience. And 5. Transcending the victim-perpetrator paradigm entirely. We are all playing interconnected roles in each other's awakening. He told the story of a man who had spent decades blaming his father for his struggles. The man said, "I realized I'd made my father into a monster purely to avoid seeing my own shadows. The day I quit blaming him, I saw him clearly for the very first time, just another wounded human doing his absolute best with his own trauma. And I saw myself clearly too, not a victim, but a soul who chose this exact father for my own spiritual evolution." This powerful realization doesn't mean accepting abuse or staying in harmful situations. It means recognizing that even our deepest wounds serve a profound purpose in our awakening. Shi Heng Yi observed that the people who genuinely quit blame don't become doormats, they become incredibly powerful. They stop giving others the power to define their personal story. The sixth thing truly spiritual people quit is a particularly subtle yet pervasive pattern: spiritual bypassing. This involves using spiritual concepts, beliefs, or practices to actively avoid genuine human experience, difficult emotions, or essential psychological work. It's essentially using enlightenment as a strategy to bypass the messy, beautiful reality of being human. Shi Heng Yi saw this constantly prevalent in spiritual communities. People using meditation to avoid truly feeling their emotions, using phrases like "everything happens for a reason" to bypass legitimate grief, or proclaiming "we're all one" to avoid establishing healthy boundaries. He saw the concept of ego death being used as a convenient excuse to skip crucial psychological work, effectively turning the spiritual path into yet another elaborate defense mechanism. However, as genuine spiritual maturity profoundly develops, this bypassing simply becomes impossible. Your soul demands full and complete embodiment, embracing both the spiritual and the human, the transcendent and the immanent, the infinite and the intimate. You can no longer effectively use heaven to escape the undeniable realities of earth. A Buddhist practitioner came to Shi Heng Yi after 20 years of dedicated meditation. He had achieved remarkable states of consciousness, experienced profound emptiness, and genuinely touched the void. Yet, his relationships were disastrous, his emotions felt numb and distant, and his overall life was deeply dissociated. He had essentially used enlightenment to bypass his own humanity. Shi Heng Yi watched him slowly, painfully quit this bypass. It was in many ways even more agonizing than his initial awakening. He had to consciously come back down into his body, into his raw feelings, and into his very human needs and desires. After touching the infinite, he had to learn to be finite again. After experiencing a state of no self, he had to painstakingly rebuild a healthy, functional self. He eloquently described it. "I thought spirituality was about transcending human experience. Now I realize it's about finally, fully having human experience. I spent 20 years trying to be nobody. Now I'm learning to be somebody, this particular somebody, with this particular life, these particular wounds, and these particular gifts." The act of quitting spiritual bypassing looks like admitting you have preferences, despite accepting what is. It looks like feeling genuine anger, despite understanding that everyone is doing their best. It involves wanting intimacy, despite knowing we're already all one. It means having clear boundaries, despite seeing all beings as ultimately yourself. And it includes experiencing fear, despite trusting the universe completely. This synthesis creates what Shi Heng Yi observed as true spiritual maturity. The remarkable ability to be fully human and fully spiritual simultaneously. It's not about using one to escape the other, but rather about living vibrantly at that sacred intersection where heaven truly meets earth. The final thing highly spiritual people quit might truly surprise you: the isolation of awakening. This is the pervasive belief that spiritual growth inherently means growing apart from others, that increased consciousness inevitably creates a sense of loneliness, and that awakening means being fundamentally alone. Shi Heng Yi observed that while spiritual growth often indeed necessitates periods of solitude for deep introspection, genuine spiritual maturity ultimately leads back to profound connection, but connection of a completely different quality. It's not the unconscious merging of the asleep, but the conscious intentional meeting of the awake. Early in the awakening process, isolation often feels both necessary and even noble. You find yourself seeing through illusions that others still firmly believe. You're feeling things that others can't yet comprehend. You're knowing things that others simply don't know. How, you might wonder, can you possibly connect with people who seem to be so profoundly asleep? But Shi Heng Yi watched this spiritual superiority slowly and gracefully dissolve in those who continue to genuinely grow. They quit the subtle arrogance of being more conscious. They quit the identity of being the awakened one among the sleeping. They quit the isolation that beneath it all was actually protecting them from true intimacy. A woman who had spent years in spiritual solitude confessed to Shi Heng Yi, "I thought I was alone because I was too conscious for others. Then I realized I was alone because I was afraid of being seen in my full humanity, my struggles, my very non-enlightened moments. My spiritual isolation was in fact spiritual pride." As she slowly but surely quit this isolation, something incredibly beautiful happened. She found she could genuinely connect with anyone, not by lowering her consciousness, but by fully embracing her own shared humanity. She could be with seemingly unconscious people without judgment because she recognized her own lingering unconscious patterns. She could deeply love asleep people because she vividly remembered her own previous state of sleep. Shi Heng Yi documented that genuine spiritual maturity leads to what he called conscious relationship, the profound ability to connect without merging, to love without unhealthy attachment, to be intimate without losing oneself, to share truth without preaching, and to truly be together in aloneness. The act of quitting isolation doesn't mean reverting to old, unconscious social patterns. Instead, it means finding those rare, precious others who are also on this journey of quitting approval-seeking, quitting specialness, quitting performance, quitting certainty, quitting blame, quitting bypassing, and with these kindred spirits together, creating something entirely new, conscious community. As we reach the conclusion of this deep dive into what highly spiritual people quit, Shi Heng Yi would want you to grasp one absolutely crucial understanding. This quitting is never a loss. It is always fundamentally a liberation. Every single thing you release creates an immense open space for something infinitely more authentic, more real, to gloriously emerge. When you quit tirelessly seeking approval, an unshakable inner worth finally emerges. When you quit desperately trying to be special, your true authentic uniqueness effortlessly emerges. When you quit performing a facade of happiness, genuine, unadulterated joy emerges. When you quit clinging to the desperate need for certainty, profound wisdom emerges. When you quit the heavy burden of blame, incredible personal power emerges. When you quit spiritual bypassing, true, embodied presence emerges. And when you quit the isolating belief that awakening means being alone, real, conscious connection beautifully emerges. This profound process is slow, often agonizingly so, because it's not merely about changing behaviors. It is about a complete identity death and subsequent rebirth. You're not just quitting old habits, you're shedding who you thought you were, piece by precious piece. And that, my friends, takes immense time, unwavering courage, and enormous self-compassion. Shi Heng Yi observed that this transformative process typically takes years, sometimes even decades. You will inevitably quit some things and then surprisingly find yourself returning to them. You will release a pattern only to grip it tightly again. You will let go only to grab back. This, however, is not a failure. It is simply the natural spiraling nature of all genuine growth. Each time you return to an old pattern, you'll find you're a little less attached to it. Each time you grip again, your grip is a little looser, a little less desperate. If you are currently in this incredible, arduous process of slowly quitting, Shi Heng Yi would want you to know unequivocally that you are not losing yourself. On the contrary, you are finally, truly finding yourself. Every release you make is a revelation. Every letting go is a profound homecoming. The very things you're quitting needed to be experienced fully, deeply, before they could be truly released. You needed to seek approval to know the ultimate emptiness of external validation. You needed to try to be special to discover the profound freedom of being perfectly ordinary. You needed the illusion of certainty to appreciate the breathtaking beauty of mystery. You needed to blame to eventually find your inherent power. This isn't a process you can rush or force. The quitting happens in its own divine time, in its own unique way. Your most important job isn't to quit faster, but to simply be present with the quitting, to mindfully notice what's gracefully falling away, to grieve what is quietly dying, and to wholeheartedly celebrate what is gloriously being born. And always, always remember, you are not alone in this. All over the world, souls are waking up and slowly, courageously quitting the very same things. We are all collectively discovering that true spiritual growth isn't about adding more to ourselves. It's about profoundly releasing what was never truly ours to begin with. It's not about becoming someone new, but about bravely quitting being someone we are not. If this profound journey deeply resonates with you, if you're recognizing your own slow quitting in these powerful patterns, then make sure to subscribe to this channel and become a vital part of our growing community of awakening souls. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our daily deep dives into the intricate, beautiful, spiritual journey.